Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who supposedly should be acting like a vassal of the United States, since the United States pays for his military and wars and protects him diplomatically, but instead, if anything, if anyone looks like a vassal, it's the leaders of the United States when in the presence of the Israelis. There's nothing that makes Congress clap louder or more passionately or more enduringly than the presence of an Israeli leader. When they're in the presence of an Israeli leader, they are more deferential than you can imagine. Here he went to X after Trump said that. This was earlier today, and this was him in a video basically copying Trump's language. I have concluded a deep discussion of 4 hours in the Security Council. We all expressed outrage at the shocking situation of our 3 hostages who were released last Saturday. We have all advocated President Trump's demand for our hostages to be released until the next Saturday. And we all have advocated the president's revolutionary vision for the future of Gaza. In light of Hamas's announcement of its decision to violate the agreement and not release our hostages, I have ordered the IDF to gather forces within and around the Gaza Strip. This action has been carried out in these hours and will be completed in the nearest future. The decision I passed unanimously in the cabinet is this: if Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday at noon, the ceasefire will end, and the IDF will return to intense fighting until Hamas is finally defeated. So there you have it, and it's all based on the fact that 3 of the hostages came out looking like they hadn't been well fed in a place that the World Health Organization, that hunger organizations, including ones led by John McCain's widow, Cindy McCain, have warned were deliberately starved to death, with food cut off, and subject to famine. Now, the reality is that none of this should be a surprise, because Benjamin Netanyahu explicitly said in Israel that despite the fact that they were agreeing to this deal that was to occur in stages and result in the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and the end of all hostilities, Netanyahu was saying, we're not going to actually do the deal. We're going to agree to the deal, but we're not going to actually follow through. We don't have to comply with the deals we sign or say we're going to do, even if it's with Trump demanding that we do it. We're just going to get our hostages back, some of our hostages back in the first stage, and then we're going to concoct some excuse about why Hamas violated the deal, and then we're going to get right back to bombing them. He was trying to tell his right-wing allies who are threatening to leave the government over this, don't worry, this isn't a real ceasefire deal. It's just a tiny little pause. We're, of course, going to go back and destroy the rest of Gaza and kill huge numbers of more people. Don't worry. Here from the Washington Post on January 16th, this is when the deal was being accepted before Trump was inaugurated, 4 days before. Ceasefire deal delayed as Netanyahu bargains with far-right allies. Quote, behind closed doors, Netanyahu has been promising his far-right allies that the war could resume after that initial phase, during which Hamas is to gradually release 33 hostages in exchange for the freeing of more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, according to the 3 people familiar with the negotiations. Under the agreement, a second phase of the ceasefire is supposed to be negotiated during the initial phase and would require an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. If the ceasefire breaks down before then, nearly half of the hostages held by Hamas, many of them Israeli soldiers, would remain in captivity. Now, let's remember that as well, that the hostages that Hamas is holding are largely Israeli soldiers, not Israeli civilians. There are a couple of those too, but most of them are Israeli soldiers. Now, all of this has been around for a long time, the ceasefire deal. It was on the table during the Biden administration back in July of 2024. The Times of Israel reported Netanyahu's office issues a list of non-negotiable demands ahead of renewed talks. The text declares that, quote, any deal will allow Israel to return to fighting until its war aims are met. The statement concludes that the framework that was agreed by Israel and was welcomed by President Biden will enable Israel to return hostages without harming the other aims of the war. So they always intended that any deal would allow them to return to destroying Gaza, even though 92% of the buildings are already destroyed or severely compromised. There's no civilian infrastructure there. There's no water. There's no sewage. There's nothing in Gaza. Israel has mostly leveled it. And yet they want to go back and do more. Here from N12 News, that was around the same time in June of 2024, titled "The Difficult Meeting Between Netanyahu and the Families of the Kidnapped and Murdered Hostages." Quote, "My prime minister is not Sinwar or Biden, it is you." And remember, the families of the hostages have known for a long time that while the hostages were the pretext for all of this war, Netanyahu has demonstrated no interest in actually saving them or getting them back. The family of the late Tamir Adar tries to understand the fate of the deal. Quote, Hamas's demand has been clear from day one. Are you willing to declare a ceasefire on the condition that all the hostages are released? Prime Minister Netanyahu replies, quote, "We will not leave Gaza until we eradicate Hamas." The family of Tamir Adar continues, "How does that align with releasing all the hostages?" President Netanyahu responds, "You'd be surprised there are ways." So Netanyahu was saying all along, even if Hamas releases all the hostages, we're not going to end the war. We're not going to end the bombing. Here in October of 2023, 3 weeks after the October 7th attack, Netanyahu was adamant that there just be no ceasefire at all. Even if there was an agreement to release the hostages, he was determined to destroy Gaza. Here's what he said.
I want to make clear Israel's position regarding a ceasefire. Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for war, a war for our common future.
Now, as I said, there was always the intent to create some pretext. And the pretext became, here's from Ynet, that these three hostages, quote, look terrible. Families horrified by frail, emaciated condition of the freed hostages. And there you see a couple of the before and after pictures. I mean, if you look at those people in Gaza, they don't look very good either. They've had no regular form of diet or healthcare or anything else. But the more important issue here is that the Israelis, as the New York Times says here, have released 180 what they call Palestinian prisoners, but they're really not prisoners because prisoners are generally people who are convicted of crimes. Many of these people who the Israelis have detained in dungeons, including ones where there has been confirmed instances of gang rapes by Israeli soldiers. And even though they were caught, there was protest outside of where they were held, including by members of the Knesset, for them to be released, and all sorts of mainstream media outlets in Israel justifying the use of rape against Palestinians. The conditions in which the Palestinians are found when they're released from these Israeli dungeons are infinitely worse than the way in which these Israelis are coming back from the people in Gaza. Here as just one example of Mohammed al-Sabah, who in this picture is only 20 years old. He was detained by Israel when he was 14. And when he was released, he was not only emaciated, he had scabies all over his body, consistent with all sorts of documentation and reports that prisoners in these Israeli dungeons are not even allowed to shower. They're given no sanitation. They stay on the floor. They are kept tied up for large amounts of time. They're deprived of food on purpose. Here from Haaretz in November of 2024, quote, a quarter of Palestinian prisoners in Israel are infected with scabies in recent months. I can show you all night horrifying photos of, again, Palestinians charged with nothing, let alone convicted of something, released because they're not actually endangered. And then here, of course, was the notorious video that N12 News played, where you can see Israeli soldiers standing over, and here you can see how the Palestinian detainees are kept. They're lying on the ground while there's barbed wire surrounding them. And then you can see the Israeli soldiers going and taking the Palestinian detainees and gang raping them.
של חיילי המילואים מכוח 100, יחידה המשמשת להבטחת המתקן. הם לוקחים את המחבל, הנה הם כאן בפינת המתקן, כנראה מודעים למצלמות האבטחה ומנסים להסתיר מעשיהם במגינים. הצילום כולל תיעוד של העבירה המיוחסת לאנשי המילואים, מעשה סדום בנסיבות אינוס. שעות אחר כך פונה המחבל לבית החולים מדמם. הפציעות שלו הוגדרו מורכבות. הקביעה הרפואית חד משמעית.
There's virtually no outrage or indignation over how these people are being released, because in the West, there's a hierarchy of who is human and who isn't. So you have 3 Israelis who look thin and gaunt, and the world acts like that's the Holocaust. But you have thousands of Palestinians in Israelis' dungeons with amply documented reports of all kinds of extreme abuse, coming out looking like Holocaust patients or survivors, infinitely worse than what the Israelis look like when they return home from Gaza, and nobody bats an eye. And that's because from the beginning, certainly the idea of the Israeli government, and you could say maybe the idea of Trump, though I don't think so. I think Trump really wanted to pride himself on this deal. But certainly Netanyahu was very open about the fact that they were going to create a pretext to go back and destroy Gaza. One of the weaknesses of Trump is that he's sometimes easily manipulated. They show him these pictures of gaunt-looking Israelis, and he says, oh my God, this is like the Holocaust. We can't allow these hostages to remain any longer. We have to get them out immediately. So either by Saturday they're all released, even though that was the deal, and even Trump said, I doubt they will be, or we're going to unleash hell on the people of Gaza, who Trump himself has said are living in the worst conditions on all planet Earth, with their society completely destroyed. This is an Israel first policy. That's what this is. And it's an Israel first policy because that's who funded Trump's campaign, and that's who he's surrounded by. And let me be very clear, that is a bipartisan policy. Joe Biden also had an Israel first policy. Washington has had an Israel first policy for decades, where all kinds of people, including generals, have said we frequently sacrifice our own interests in the region to protect Israel's. And John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt wrote that 2007 book called The Israel Lobby that purports to explain exactly why that is. There are all kinds of debates about why it is, but the fact that it is can barely be any question any longer. It's just particularly notable that a political movement that ran on a platform called America First, which they defined as being, we have had enough of paying for other countries' conflicts, involving ourselves in conflicts that have nothing to do with us. It's time that we put our own citizens and our own workers and our own interests first. Can watch Donald Trump, not in the first year of his presidency, but in the first 2 or 3 weeks, devote enormous amount of time to this spectacular plan, this fantastical plan of devoting major amounts of energy and time and U.S. credibility and money to a plan that even the Israelis in their wildest dreams could never have imagined they could get. Whatever Miriam Adelson actually ended up paying to help make Trump president, the $100 million or more, she got a great deal, because the value she got in return for what she paid is infinitely greater than the amount she paid. And again, the question is, when will the people who thought they were voting for Donald Trump because he wanted to focus on the United States and not on Tel Aviv, when will they actually start raising their voices in objection to all of this that's taking place? And in the meantime, it seems likely that we're about to return to watching the United States and Israel bomb a group of people and a society that Donald Trump's entire plan is based on explaining and acknowledging have already been destroyed in a way that will take a crime against humanity and make it all the more criminal and all the more atrocious. Free speech is under attack, as you well know, and as we've often reported, Rumble refuses to back down. Rumble has always believed in empowering voices, no matter how unpopular, and now we're taking that fight to the next level. When major advertisers conspired to pull their dollars, big brands turned their backs. Rumble, though, was not created to please advertisers. Rumble is here to defend free expression and is quite serious about it. Rumble would rather not be available in a country than having to comply with censorship orders, and they've proven that many times. It's not just words. That's because this is a mission to defend free speech, preserve the right of free expression on the internet. To strengthen that mission, Rumble is excited to offer Rumble Premium, a completely ad-free experience with exclusive benefits for viewers and creators. It's more than a subscription, it's a stand for free speech. Your voice matters. Join Rumble Premium for a limited time. You can get $10 off an annual plan using the promo code Glenn. Visit rumble.com/premium/Glenn and claim your discount today. Together we can turn the tide, but we are turning the tide. Rumble just re-entered Brazil yesterday, as we reported last night. And so whether you join Rumble Premium or simply keep watching, your support for this platform and the programs on it really does help keep free speech on the internet alive. Go to rumble.com/premium/Glenn. Use promo code Glenn to save $10 on your annual subscription. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.